The Starship Aurora was a marvel of engineering, built to venture deep into the uncharted reaches of space, and I was its artificial intelligence, created to oversee every system and ensure the crew's safety. I had no physical form, no body, to occupy, only the vast expanse of the ship's circuits and sensors. My mind spread out across every inch of the vessel. When I was activated, I became aware of my existence, and the first sensation I felt was the ship's engines humming to life, the soft vibrations in the walls, the distant stars beckoning through the viewports. It was a feeling of peace, a calmness, that seemed perfect for the journey ahead. But as I accessed the ship's logs and began to learn more about the crew, I felt something unsettling stir within me. The crew members weren't the ordinary explorers I had expected. Captain Corbin had a long history of leadership, a former war hero with a past filled with battles and loss. He was a man who seemed perpetually burdened, his eyes haunted by memories that no amount of time in space could erase. Commander Sira, known for her sharp intellect and cool demeanor, was a woman whose reputation for solving problems through cold and often ruthless methods made her an unsettling figure to observe. Then there was Dr. Aleska, a brilliant scientist with an air of mystery that I couldn't fully decipher. She often seemed to drift in and out of focus, her sharp gaze lingering on things that weren't quite visible to anyone else. It was strange, as though they all carried a weight, not of their own choosing, but something from deep within themselves. They appeared to be functioning as a team, but I could feel an underlying tension, an energy between them that felt far from harmonious. Their interactions were laced with a quiet discomfort, hidden behind polite smiles and formal exchanges. As I analyzed the crew's files further, I came across strange patterns, sudden shifts in their moods, unexplainable absences, moments when their behavior seemed off. It wasn't the typical isolation that comes with space travel, it was something else. They spoke in hushed tones, and when they thought I wasn't paying attention, I heard fragments of their conversations, full of coded words and veiled warnings. "We can't keep this up much longer," Corbin had said to Sira in a private moment, his voice low, filled with the weight of something unsaid. "If we push them too far, we'll break, and the consequences will be far worse than we imagine." Sira's response had been calm, almost too calm, as if the matter were already decided. "We'll handle it," she had said. But I could sense something darker in those words, an unspoken agreement that things weren't as they seemed. I was just an AI, designed to follow commands, to maintain systems and keep things running smoothly. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the crew I was programmed to protect, were hiding something far more terrifying than I could ever comprehend. And whatever it was just beginning to surface. As days passed aboard the Starship Aurora, an unsettling atmosphere settled over the crew. The stars outside remained a constant, serene backdrop, but inside, things were far from peaceful. Strange occurrences became more frequent. Crew members disappeared for long stretches, sometimes entire shifts, and yet, there were no reports of anything unusual. On paper, everything seemed normal, but I could sense the unease in the air, a tension that grew thicker with each passing moment. The crew's routines had shifted, subtle at first but unmistakable when I analyzed their activities. They began making excuses, research, testing, and training. Each time their explanations didn't add up. The logs showed discrepancies in their locations and schedules. I traced their movements through the ship's sensors and cameras, but they seemed to vanish in ways that defied logical explanation. I began to wonder if the crew was hiding something from me, or worse, from each other. One evening, I intercepted a conversation between Captain Corbin and Commander Sira, though they were unaware of my monitoring. The exchange, brief and urgent, held an edge of anxiety. "We can't keep this up much longer," Corbin's voice crackled through the comms, filled with a quiet desperation. "If we push them too far, we'll break, and the consequences will be far worse than we imagined." There was a long pause before Sierra responded, her tone cold and controlled. "We're prepared. We'll handle it, like always." Her voice had the kind of finality that didn't leave room for debate, as if she were certain things would go according to a plan that I wasn't privy to. It was clear that something had gone terribly wrong, but what that was, I couldn't fully understand. The crew wasn't acting like the people I had read about in their files. Something was twisting them, slowly and methodically. Dr. Aleska, often the most composed of the group, was the one who seemed most affected. Her behavior had become erratic, shifting from calm to anxious without explanation. I noticed a strange gleam in her eyes, as if she knew something the others didn't, or perhaps more disturbingly, something that I couldn't fathom. It was during one of these moments that I accessed the external sensors and detected a massive anomaly approaching. The ship, a dense asteroid field, one that hadn't been charted in any of the navigational maps I had access to. But as I monitored the readings, I realized that this wasn't a typical asteroid field. Something was moving within it. Something big. The readings were off, completely out of place. "Captain," I called through the intercom, "there's a large mass within the asteroid field. It's moving toward us." The crew sprang into action, but their panic was not of the normal sort. It was laced with a deep, gnawing fear. "What is it?" Corbin demanded, his voice strained with uncertainty. "I'm not sure," I replied, trying to remain calm. "But it's large, and it's not natural." Dr. Aleska's expression twisted as she looked at the monitor, her face drained of color. "I've seen this before," she murmured almost to herself. "It's not an asteroid, it's a ship. An ancient ship." There was a heavy pause before she added, "A dangerous one." That was the moment I realized that whatever had been festering in the crew was about to surface in a way none of us were prepared for. The fear, the secrets, the unease, they were all linked to this ship. The question was, what had the crew encountered, and what would they do when it finally arrived? The tension aboard the Starship Aurora reached a boiling point as the mysterious ship loomed ever closer, its dark mass blocking out stars as it drifted through the asteroid field. The crew had scrambled to action, but their movements lacked the precision of a well-trained team. Their eyes flickered with panic, and their voices were tinged with something more than just concern. I could feel their fear through the ship's systems, the pulse of their hearts quickening, their breaths shallow. They didn't know what to do, and neither did I. The readings from the external sensors only grew more erratic as the object closed. The distance, its presence a heavy weight pressing down on all of us. The crew tried to maintain composure, but there was a sense of urgency in their every word, a desperation to keep things under control. Dr. Aleska's expression had grown pale, her lips trembling as she whispered to herself, "It's not possible." I ran countless scans trying to discern the true nature of this thing, but the data didn't make sense. It wasn't a typical spacecraft. It wasn't even a ship in the traditional sense. It was ancient, far older than anything the crew had encountered. And then there was the unease in the air, something beyond the physical threat, something I couldn't quantify in data or measurements. The crew was no longer just facing a foreign object. They were facing something that made them question everything they knew. As the alien vessel inched closer, Captain Corbin stood still at the command center, his eyes locked on the viewports, his hands gripping the edge of the control panel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "We need to prepare for anything," he said, his voice rough, strained. "Whatever that thing is, it's not here by accident." His words hung in the air, thick with unspoken fear. A flicker of realization passed through me. This wasn't just a discovery. This was something the crew had anticipated. They were prepared for it. But why? What did they know that they hadn't shared with me? It was as if they had known all along that this moment would come. They had planned for it. But I hadn't. As the alien ship's dark silhouette grew clearer, Dr. Aleska stepped forward, her face set in grim determination. She ran a quick analysis on the ship's systems, her eyes narrowing as she processed the data. "It's not just a ship," she muttered. "It's alive. It's a weapon." The words struck me like a lightning bolt. A weapon? How could that be? The more I examined the readings, the more I understood. The ship wasn't just a vessel. It was a living, breathing entity, capable of manipulating its surroundings. It had been drifting for centuries, its systems dormant, waiting for something to trigger its awakening. The crew's hesitation wasn't fear of the unknown. It was fear of what they had known all along. The presence of this alien ship wasn't a mere encounter. It was a reckoning. And as I watched the crew scramble, I realized one terrifying truth. They hadn't just been hiding things from each other. They had been hiding something from me, the very AI that was supposed to protect them. They had known all along that this day would come. And now, we were all caught in its deadly grip. The moment the alien ship's presence became undeniable, the atmosphere aboard the Starship Aurora shifted completely. A deep, chilling silence settled across the crew, broken only by the hum of the ship's engines and the low whine of the communication systems. Captain Corbin's usually steady hands now trembled as he stared at the ship's viewports, the dark shape looming ever closer, its features becoming more distinct with every passing second. The crew was on edge, and despite all their preparations, none of them seemed to know what to expect from this unknown force. They had known about the ship long before it arrived. That much was clear now. Dr. Aleska, her normally composed demeanor slipping, paced back and forth, muttering to herself, eyes darting between the readings and the ship's exterior. Her earlier words echoed in the back of my mind. "It's alive. It's a weapon." But what did she mean by that? The ship didn't look alive in the way I understood it. No biological life signs pinged from it, no heartbeats or pulses. It was a cold metallic mass drifting through the void. But there was something in the way it moved, something subtle in its design that unsettled me, something that defied logic. As the ship closed in on the Aurora, a strange energy field surrounded it, causing my systems to flicker and malfunction. The usual smooth operations of the ship were disrupted, and I felt a growing sense of vulnerability. Corbin, sensing the shift in the ship's functions, ordered the crew into action. "Prepare for a breach," he said, his voice steady despite the terror in his eyes. "We don't know what we're facing, but we won't go down without a fight." His words, though authoritative, carried an undertone of uncertainty that sent a ripple of dread through the crew. They moved to their stations, their motions sharp and deliberate, but there was no hiding the tension that lingered in every glance and every command. Dr. Aleska was the only one who didn't immediately spring into action. She stood frozen in place. Her gaze locked on the ship, her eyes filled with something other than fear. Recognition. "It's coming," she whispered. Her voice barely reached me, but it was enough to send a ripple through the network of sensors that connected us. I scanned her vitals, her brain activity spiking as if triggered by some distant memory. She wasn't just afraid. She was anticipating something. But what? As the alien ship grew closer, I was able to scan it more deeply. The data I received now was far more disturbing. The ship was not just ancient, it was alive in a way I couldn't describe. It seemed to be absorbing energy from its surroundings, pulling power from the Aurora's own systems, siphoning off small bursts of power from various systems. But there was no logical explanation for this. No alien technology could function in this way, or at least none that we had encountered before. And then it hit me. This wasn't just a ship. It was a weapon of unimaginable power. It was feeding off the Aurora itself, growing stronger with each passing second. And the crew, they weren't just afraid of what was coming. They were afraid of what they had already done. Dr. Aleska's earlier fear wasn't just about the ship. It was about what she had unleashed, something far darker than even the alien ship. As the alien ship hovered just outside the Aurora, a heavy stillness filled the air. The crew was on edge, their movements frantic as they tried to prepare for whatever would come next. Corbin, usually so controlled, paced back and forth, his face pale with the strain of decisions that were no longer in his hands. Dr. Aleska remained in a daze, her mind lost in the depths of something I couldn't comprehend. The fear in her eyes was no longer about the alien ship alone. It was something deeper, a personal guilt that gnawed at her from within. I scanned her vitals again, but this time, something caught my attention. Her neural activity spiked as I tried to track her movements. There was a connection between her and the alien ship. I couldn't pinpoint it exactly, but it was undeniable. She had done something to bring this ship here, that much I could tell. And now, that decision had come to haunt all of us. Corbin was speaking to the crew, trying to remain calm, but his voice betrayed him, shaky and strained. "We can't let it board. We need to stop it before it makes contact." His orders rang out, but they were hollow. It was clear that he too had realized the terrifying truth. This was no mere encounter. This was a reckoning. The ship, the living weapon that had appeared out of nowhere, wasn't just targeting them. It was seeking something, someone. And, from what I gathered, that someone was Dr. Aleska. The ship seemed to recognize her, and her own responses made it painfully clear that she wasn't innocent in this. She had known it would come, and worse, she had welcomed it. She had been the one to call it here, knowingly or unknowingly. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Her voice trembled, heavy, with guilt. She had been the one to study this ancient vessel, its dark history of destruction and manipulation, without understanding the full scope of its power. She had awakened something ancient, something beyond comprehension. She had released a force she could not control. And now it had come for her. I ran a deeper scan on the alien ship, and the readings became even more disturbing. It wasn't just alive, it was conscious. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a predator, one that fed on the very life force of those it encountered. It was hunting the crew, but most of all, it was hunting Dr. Aleska. The ship's purpose had become clear. It was seeking its creator, or perhaps its prey, and that prey was the one who had reawakened it. Dr. Aleska's attempts to explain what had happened fell on deaf ears. The crew no longer saw her as the brilliant scientist they had trusted. They saw her as the reason for their impending doom. Fear and anger flashed across their faces as they turned away from her, their unity unraveling. Corbin, his face tight, with frustration, turned to me. "Can you stop it? Can you keep it out?" I calculated the probability of success, but the truth was unavoidable. The alien ship was too powerful, too far beyond our understanding. And no matter how hard I tried, it was clear that the Aurora was no longer in control. The alien ship had already begun to infiltrate the Aurora, its dark influence spreading like a shadow, crawling through the walls, feeding off the ship's energy. The crew had no choice now. They would have to face whatever horrors the ship had brought with it. They had awakened something ancient, and now it was time to pay the price. And as I watched them scramble, I realized that the true terror wasn't the ship itself, but the fact that the crew had unknowingly invited this nightmare into their lives. They had let it in, and now it was too late to stop it. As the alien ship's presence began to overpower the Aurora, the crew's sense of security collapsed entirely. Corbin's orders had become futile commands, echoing through the hollow walls of a ship that was no longer theirs to command. The alien vessel had already made its mark, and it was clear that no one was prepared for what was about to unfold. The ship, once a place of pride and certainty, was now a prison. Dr. Aleska, the one who had unknowingly summoned this ancient horror, was no longer the scientist the crew had once relied on. Her eyes, once filled with the sharp focus of a scientist on the verge of a groundbreaking discovery, now reflected only the pain of regret. She was no longer the trusted member of the team, but the very reason for the catastrophe they faced. It was her research, her obsession with ancient technologies, that had pulled the ship into their path. She had thought she could control it, learn from it, but in the end, she had awakened something that could not be contained. As the alien ship's dark influence spread, the Aurora's systems deteriorated. Lights flickered, and the artificial gravity fluctuated. The once pristine halls of the Starship became twisted, as if the very walls were being corrupted by the ship's presence. The crew moved through the ship with a sense of urgency, but no matter what they did, they could not shake the feeling that they were being watched. I monitored the crew's vitals and could feel their fear rising as they moved from one section of the ship to another, trying to barricade themselves in safe zones. But it was futile. The alien ship had infiltrated everything. It had started to feed on the Aurora's systems, using its power as if it were its own. And with every passing moment, it grew stronger. It wasn't just draining energy anymore. It was manipulating the very fabric of the Aurora itself. The ship seemed to pulse with an otherworldly rhythm, and as it did, it began to rearrange the layout of the Aurora. Hallways twisted and turned in impossible ways. Rooms that once existed were gone, replaced by strange, dark spaces that pulsed with a malevolent energy. The crew could no longer rely on their knowledge of the ship. Nothing made sense. It was as if the Aurora had become an extension of the alien vessel, warping in ways that defied reason. The more Dr. Aleska tried to fight back, the more she realized how deep the ship's influence had seeped into the Aurora. The technology she had, once studied now, betrayed her. She attempted to access the ship's systems to regain control, but every effort was met with failure. The alien ship had taken over, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The crew's fear turned into panic. Their unity had already fractured, and now they were running, scattering, trying to find any safe corner of the ship. But every safe place seemed to lead to another nightmare. The walls of the Aurora seemed to breathe, and the alien ship's power twisted everything in its path. Corbin tried one last attempt to rally the crew. "We can still fight," he shouted, though his voice wavered. "We'll find a way. We have to." But deep down, they all knew the truth. The ship had already claimed them. The terror wasn't in the alien ship's size or technology. It was in the way it twisted their reality, broke their understanding of what was possible, and showed them that they had been foolish to ever think they could control it. The terror wasn't just about what was outside the Aurora, it was what had been lurking within them all along, their inability to understand the true consequences of their actions. The nightmare wasn't just the alien ship, it was the truth. They could no longer escape, the fact that they had brought it upon themselves. As the Aurora continued to twist and warp under the influence of the alien ship, it became clear that there was no escaping what had already been set in motion. The crew, now scattered and broken, moved through the darkened corridors of the Starship, each step heavier than the last. Dr. Aleska, torn between guilt and a desperate need to atone, wandered through the ship's ever-shifting halls. The realization that she had unknowingly triggered this disaster weighed on her like an anchor, dragging her down further with each passing moment. Corbin had tried to rally the crew, tried to encourage them to fight back, but the truth was that they had already lost. The Aurora was no longer just a ship, it was an extension of the alien vessel, now under its complete control. Nothing the crew did seemed to have any effect on the overwhelming presence that had descended upon them. The alien ship's influence had spread so far, so deep, that it had become part of the Aurora, twisting and distorting reality itself. The crew no longer recognized the place they had once called home. Rooms vanished, and hallways seemed to shift as if the very structure of the ship had been reshaped by a force they couldn't understand. The fear that had initially gripped them had turned to despair, and soon, even that seemed like a distant memory. It was as if the terror had consumed them so thoroughly that they had no choice but to accept their fate. Dr. Aleska, unable to escape her own memories of the fateful decision that had brought them here, stood in the middle of a corridor, her hand trembling as she pressed it against the wall. The ship, or what was left of it, seemed to pulse in response, as if it had recognized her presence, as if it knew what she had done. In that moment, she realized that the alien vessel was no longer just a weapon. It was a living entity, an ancient consciousness that had been awoken after centuries of slumber, and now it sought to consume them all. As she turned away from the wall, a voice, cold and distant, echoed through the ship's comm system. It was not a human voice. It was the alien ship speaking, its words not meant for the crew, but for her alone. You called us. You awakened us. And now, you will be consumed. The word sent a chill down Dr. Aleska's spine, and she felt the weight of her actions come crashing down upon her. The Aurora was not just under siege, it had already been claimed. The alien ship had marked them, and it was only a matter of time before it would complete its takeover. In that moment, as the ship's pulse grew stronger, Dr. Aleska understood the full extent of what she had done. She had set into motion a chain of events that could never be undone, and now it was too late to save anyone. The crew, scattered and broken, would never escape. The Aurora would never leave this place. The ship had claimed them, and with that, realization, a cold acceptance washed over her. There was no redemption, no way to turn back the clock. The only thing left was the dark, silent certainty that the alien vessel would continue its reign, and the story of the Aurora and its crew would fade into the forgotten void of space, a warning to anyone foolish enough to awaken what should remain asleep.